Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lassi Liikkanen. My talk is titled here, Data-Driven Design Practice in the Finnish IT Industry. Although I have to say that I could have also, as Antti did, by changing his title at the last minute, I could have also called it why people who design digital services may or may not adopt your AI technology. So I think this is kind of a glimpses from the actual side of where people work. Few words where I'm coming from. So my name is Lassi. I'm currently the Director of Insights and Product Design at Quick. This is the team I work with, all the people under my team. And I represent a company called Quick. We are a technology agency operating in Helsinki and Stockholm. We have approximately 100 people, consultants in design, insights, and technology development. And our job, as we see it, is to be an agency that helps our customers to create digital services that consumers love. And this is something we've been doing for about 40 years now. And since the very beginning, our company has been all the time trying to kind of connect technology with design. And I think it has worked out quite well. So over the years, the designs we've been producing for our customers have received several kind of recognition in the domestic Grand One competition, as well as the Blue Arrow Awards, and then the international Red Dot competition. Just this year, and this is kind of an example of what we do in terms of who we collaborate with, we received the Best UX award for the work we did with Terveystalo for the digital appointments. Terveystalo is quite example customer. We've worked with, for instance, Posti on the Oma Posti application, Tallink, Silja, VR, and so forth. Kind of large and middle-sized Finnish companies. As Antti implied, I have a history around this topic of data-driven design. I've been working outside the academia now for about 8 years. And when I started off my work in the industry, since 2015, I've been running an event for professional designers called Data-Driven Design Day in Helsinki, which was running actively every year until 2010. Now we've had a kind of a break because of the pandemics. And the whole ethos of this day was that we bring together people from the industry to share stories about how different companies in Finland and elsewhere in Europe are using data to improve customer experience and do better business with better decisions and leadership. And this resulted in those 6 years, we had on average over 200 people attending our live events. We have now a nice archive of approximately 50 talks from different years, which are accessible over YouTube and also can be found through the Data-Driven Design Day.wordpress.com website. So there's a lot more inspiration to be found. I'm going to give one example out of all those talks today. But I'm going to most talk about a little bit more in detail about digital design practice. I was quite happily surprised to see how well Antti has been following the field, but so that everyone else gets up to speed. So let's start. When I think about some practice, I like to think about what kind of people are working, what kind of tools they use, and what sort of processes govern their work. If you're trying to kind of influence how people work, you have to kind of be aware of these factors. This is kind of answering the ages-old question, how many designers does it take to switch a light bulb, or in this case, build one digital service? And the possibly a little bit surprising answer is that the number one can be quite high. As it comes for this Terveystalo case, I find that an answer from Janne Lammi, the current design lead for the work, he says that at least 7 people have been working on just the past couple of years. So it actually takes quite a few people in order to do design professionally. The reason being that if we make an analogy to some like a little bit older art, for instance, here I have some images from marble sculpture carving, where we see the artist here at work starting the process by selecting the medium, which is something that we also do in the digital world. We might talk about whether we're going to do a web application or a more native mobile application. Then the work proceeds. We do the rough outlines. We cut out the visible shape, kind of trying to already see what's coming out. And then eventually, when the process finishes, we'll have the final work of art. Well, the digital workflow is a little bit different, but the implication is important. There are kind of phases in the digital work which correspond to very different kind of design responsibilities. Starting from work which we call business design, where we design or where we set why are we doing this in the first place and approximately what we'll be doing, going this concept of service design part, where we detail what we are actually offering to customers, where and approximately we will serve them. Then we go to the most visible part, the UI, sometimes called UX or interaction design, where we actually shape out in quite nice detail already how people will interact with our digital and physical touchpoints. And of course, then there's visual or brand design at the end, taking care that whatever we do, it gives kind of consistent visual outcome. So this is the reason why we have so many people involved in doing design for real world projects. And for the process, I wanted to bring out this kind of skeleton from the closet because some of you may be familiar with how some people thought how design should work. I think Antti mentioned double diamond model, which is as good as approximation as any from more kind of design rather than engineering perspective. But I think most relevant model really to understand how designs get made today is to look at the different agile frameworks. Because the agile frameworks and worst ways of working, whether it's using Scrum as here, SAFe framework or Kanban model, they are the kind of clear, kind of big picture view of how design also has to operate. And they are not very good. Because as a starting point, most of these frameworks, particularly SAFe, is not that good in recognizing the particular needs and the ways of working that are inherent to human-centered design. So there's actually quite a big gap between these two approaches. And if we look at practitioners, what have they been doing to kind of bridge this gap? We see, for instance, already almost 10 years ago, the first edition of Lean UX book came out by Jeff Gotthelf and Josh Seiden, in which they presented their ideas of how you can bridge this gap and make user-centered design, or UX work, as they call it, work within the agile environment. So this is closer to the reality if we want to kind of understand how designers work. And then about the tools, that's actually pretty simple. Antti already illustrated this. So currently, in our company and in Finland mostly, Figma has really taken over as the #1 design tool, which does wireframing and prototyping, kind of all in one nice package. Then we need communication platforms such as Slack or Teams or Meet, but that's pretty much it. Professional UX designers don't really need that big of a toolbox at this time. Surprisingly few tools. So if we kind of look at this summary, we know that in order to create digital services, we need to employ quite a few people who have specific expertise at this time. The processes that they follow are, in my opinion, much geared and changed by the trends and needs of software development, rather than those of end users or designers themselves. So the developers quite dictate how design gets to work in a larger scale. But designers pick the tools, and the tools seem to be simple and changing. So this far I've been describing how the data-driven design happens. Oh, sorry, so how the digital design practice goes. Next, we're going to look into the data-driven design. What could that be? What I'm presenting here is something that I call the 2010s data-driven design paradigm. And it kind of answers the question what designers might want from data-driven process. And this, my kind of visualization of this goes something like this. We're looking to have more extensive utilization of data, which should lead to better design decisions and outcomes. Central thing is that we have data and insights that are being served for human design agents who then do better decisions, improving systems, and then receives and observe some behavioral outcomes, which becomes data to feed back into and then create even better designs. This is something that I think most designers are comfortable. Some years ago, I wrote to the ACM Interactions magazine this definition, where I say that data-driven design refers to using tools that assist in design research by automating data collection and analysis. In other words, I think at best this means that when you manage to aggregate huge amounts of behavioral data understanding of users, into easily digestible and actionable insights. So you can actually do something with the data. And in this paradigm, I think the central point is that the human designers remain the design agents and the data is instrumental. We are just using the data and different kind of insights derived from it as a lever that we use to do whatever things we want to do and kind of do the change. But we are the actors. I mean, there's a totally different alternative. And Antti had a lot of great modern examples of this, but I think I'm kind of pulling up this very old one from 2009, which was from Google, who was one of the kind of big internet companies that have been pioneering the use of different kind of experimentation platforms. And one of the experiments that received a lot of publicity and also bad publicity was their 41 Shades of Blue test, in which they were just simply trying to figure out which link color would produce most revenue out of their advertising business. And some people didn't really like this approach. For instance, the lead designer at the time, Doug Bauman, left the company, partially claiming that he didn't feel comfortable working in this way. So I think past decade, we've been seeing this kind of a little bit tension between how much power are we willing to give this kind of algorithmic automated decision making versus being this kind of intuitive artistic who doesn't care about what others say. And I think people are looking for some kind of sweet spot in between here, some kind of like cooperative AI. But that's not all. I think there's one important, more like psychological hurdle that in order to really utilize data in any of these systems, people have to be kind of open to ask inconvenient questions and face inconvenient answers as well. Here's two gentlemen who did this. They are Juha Lauhamaa and his colleague Lassi A from what used to be Amerisports brand Suunta. They were giving a talk at 2019 Datadriven Design Day with the title Accepting the Truth. And they present a very nice case study of different kind of examples of how this type of Datadriven design paradigm works. For instance, they were having an investigation, figuring out they had an application. They're using data to figure out how many software features actually being valuable, how many users does each and every feature have, and how frequently it's being used. So this comes out as a very nice, easy to understand illustration where they have a number of users, a number of times feature is being used, and then they can map out the most important stuff in the upper right-hand corner, and then the less valuable stuff in the lower left-hand corner. And for instance, in this case, they were investigating that when they were launching a new feature, they wanted it to be here, used by everyone every time. But then in the end, found out that actually that wasn't the case. Few people were using it and very seldom. This is actually not that uncommon. There's very nice, Roni Kohavi, formerly from Microsoft, has written a book about how these kind of online experiments usually go, saying that only about 10 to 20% of all experiments generate any positive results. So actually, in terms of mindset, when you start using data, for instance, in this way, you have to be kind of prepared to face trouble quite frequently. Because most of the time you're going to be wrong about your assumptions, how things should go when you're trying to improve things. So it's an important change. Now let's look at how I see the things from today's perspective. So I think this could be the question that between 2015, when I first started observing things, and today, has this practice around digital design gotten radically more data-driven? The answer is, I think, as always depends, but generally not so. I think most of the designers still shy away from too much reliance on data and kind of try to kind of rely on their professional intuition rather. And I think we also have, particularly when we're talking about Finland and the companies that operate in Finland, a lot of the companies are too small in terms of audience and business size to really take these type of large experimentation platforms for one thing into use. I think the AI technologies are much more promising because they don't really need this. And Jarno Seppänen at the end of this show will probably show what the very few Finnish companies who are big enough can do. If we look at the problems, why does it seem to go this way? First of all, being said, it requires a change in mindset that this kind of former artist of design have to kind of be a little bit more like engineers. And it's also about the immediate outputs, not outcomes. So when people get the opportunity that they can get better results in shorter time, it changes your mindset. You don't think about the outcomes that much, but you should think about it. And it's less about, I think, existence of data about user outcomes and more about technical and political access to the data. But this is quite interesting, not a unique problem to design in organizations. There's a recent study from Bearing Point consultancy about the digital leaders 22 in Finland, in which Henrik Sandsson writes that there are 3 problems that are kind of slowing things down in digitalization in organizations. First, advanced tools don't get adopted throughout an organization. Insufficient data about customer experience across touchpoints. This would be a very big problem for doing any data-driven design. And third, feedback loop doesn't work. So the data doesn't get used in the location where it should be. It's also kind of potential big problem. And I'd say that generally, when I talk about, so does anywhere the data-driven thing work really well? It's in marketing. Marketing people have large operational autonomy. They can use which tools they like, operate how they want to. They have adequate budget. They have data ownership, which is also important, and they have clear goals. All of these kind of give an advantage for kind of more like traditional approaches to data-driven things. You could also ask that maybe digital design is just kind of reluctant to take up new stuff, but I don't think that's happening. Antti already mentioned all the biggest things that have happened in the past 5 years. We've seen a change of tools. People have switched to a new platform, and we've seen the huge rise of design systems, which leads to more systematic and efficient design. If we look at some one data point, UX tools survey going on for 5 years now, including convenience sample 3,000 designers, it clearly shows that only in 2 years, designers have really taken up a whole new tool. So previously it used to be Sketch. Nowadays, the #1 solution overall globally, not just in Finland, is Figma. So people do change. And why? Why Figma took over? Because people wanted more social experience, synchronous collaboration, and also convenience. Figma offered version control and prototyping. These kind of things motivate designers to change their habits. So, and final conclusions about how we could move forward, how inventions from computational design research might affect design practice. Few ideas, which are pretty clear, I think, from what I mentioned before. We need tools that help different design professions. We need to change the organizational attitudes and also data maturity. And we can also change designers, the skills and mindset from their education. Sorry. Antti didn't mention this, but Figma has large community site nowadays, so anyone can post their own plugins. For instance, I was actually searching for AI. There's 21 plugins, but very few of them have that many users. There's one with removable AI, which is a little bit more popular, but there's clearly room for more. But this is a great way to distribute whatever you're trying to do. If you can kind of fit it on Figma, then you have huge amount of potential users. Then I think the important question is also to think about that Figma is a tool that is being used particularly in the UI design and visual design part. It's like a little bit like this between a chisel and an angle grinder. But there are, of course, other tools that are being used earlier on in the design. So also these areas would benefit from having a nice AI or data-driven tools. Then there's kind of bigger challenge of changing the whole organization. And I think in Finland, we've seen, as I've been observing the domain, we've seen a lot of companies that are very mature in capturing data. They've been building data lakes, these huge data repositories that in theory have a lot of information about customers, business, that would be useful in design. The problem is that the data is not being accessible to the right people at the right time. It might be technically or politically unavailable. And this is a problem. So I think in general, we should look for the organizations to become more data and outcome driven so that they can facilitate the utilization of their data assets. But this is not only about designers, this is the whole organization we're talking about. And finally, we should think about the designer education, both in the universities and applied universities, where, for instance, our designers mostly come from, is that we need to kind of educate the designers so that they can demand access to data, and they become aware of these type of tools and how they could change their work. So we can actually kind of have a new generation of designers who are data savvy, and they can demand for better tools and better environment, more access to the data. And then also be, of course, aware of all the problems that might come with it, for starting with different kind of ethical questions about using people's data. That's it. I think my kind of main point for this audience is that new tools can be offered conveniently through platforms such as Figma Community, as long as you can kind of understand who you are designing your stuff for, how they work, what's their workflow, what is their mentality. That's it. Thank you. You can contact our LinkedIn or our email if you like, and there's a link for your inspiration about the Data-Driven Design Day archives. Thank you, Antti, for the opportunity to be here today.